the minimum buy it now price on eBay right now seems to be around £40, and the maximum is about £140. That's far too expensive. Don't pay anything like that. Well, hey everybody, thank you for checking in once again and welcome to another episode. Well, today we're going to have a look at some long vintage lenses at around about the 200mm mark, and I'm going to show you some nice cheap long vintage lenses that you can buy for your mirrorless camera or indeed for your film camera. So there were lots of long lenses around about 200mm made. Back in the day there were f2 and f2.8 versions, and those are still around of course, but they were very expensive when they were new and they're still very expensive now, and quite a few of them are sought after by collectors, so we won't worry too much about those. We'll be looking really at the less expensive versions targeted towards the hobbyist and amateur photographer, lenses with a reach of about 200mm or so, but with usually an f4 aperture, maximum aperture opening. And those lenses, I'm glad to say, are still cheap. All the major manufacturers made one. There was a pretty big market for them. And they are still cheap. They were cheap when they were new. They're still cheap today, and you can buy these lenses from around about £40 or thereabouts. You will get them cheaper if you're patient, but the minimum buy it now price on eBay right now seems to be around £40, and the maximum is about £140. That's far too expensive. Don't pay anything like that. Really, you shouldn't be paying any more than £40 to £50 for one of these lenses because they're not in massive demand. There is a demand, but it's not huge. They were consumer lenses when they were new, and they still are consumer lenses. They're not the fanciest, and so they're not that expensive, but they will give you some fantastic images, and we're going to have a look at some of the nicest ones that you can buy today. Mirror lenses are still fairly cheap, I'm glad to say. We'll have a look at some of those long mirror lenses, and long zoom lenses are even cheaper, 70 to 200 or to 210, which was a fairly common range of focal lengths back in the day. 70 to 210mm lenses are still very cheap indeed. You'll find one of those from around £20 or thereabouts, and all of these lenses then are very cost effective, and they've got lots of reach as well. I do like a little reach, and these lenses certainly have plenty of it. 200mm will take you very far into the distance. 300mm with a mirror lens will take you even further. And don't forget sensor sizes, right? So the focal lengths I'm going to give you today, these lenses are vintage lenses made for 35mm film. So the focal lenses are correct for 35mm film. They're correct for full frame mirrorless cameras, but if you're shooting on an APS-C camera with one of these lenses, the focal length, or rather the effective focal length, will increase by 1/3. So a 200mm, if you put it on an APS-C camera, effectively, please note that word effectively, because nothing about the lens changes, but on an APS-C camera, a 200mm lens will have an effective focal length of 300mm. If you put it on a micro 4/3 camera, then it will have an effective focal length of twice 200mm, which is 400. But a 300mm lens on a micro 4/3 camera, and you've got a 600mm reach. On an APS-C it would be an effective 400mm reach. So sensor sizes, if you're shooting with a crop sensor camera, which I often do, I don't always shoot full frame, then these effective focal lengths increase and you get even more reach. So that's pretty cool. Long lenses like this one, this is a fairly typical sort of size. They're pretty big, and you definitely get more lens than camera when you're out shooting with one of these, especially when you consider you've got to put an adapter on there as well, so that's going to add an inch or thereabouts. So they're pretty big to take out, and they're pretty heavy, but they do have lots of uses. They're great for nature shots. Really, really useful if, for example, you're a bird watcher and you want to do some birding shots, or any other kind of wildlife nature shots. They're great for. They're good for sports photography if you want to do a bit of sports photography with one of these lenses. General photography, they're good for, sure, but they are a bit big, and I wouldn't want to take a lens this big out to do general photography with me. If I wanted a long lens for general, I'd take a 135, but there's no reason you can't do general photography with one of these. They're also really good for street photography and for getting candid portraits of people, and I've got some beautiful candid portraits of people using lenses of this focal length and a little bit longer also. There is a little controversy surrounding candid street portraits. Is it correct to do it? Is it appropriate? Is it right? Some say it shouldn't be done unless people know they're being photographed, or unless you get their permission, which of course spoils the candid nature of the image. And indeed in some countries it's illegal. You're not allowed to do street photography of that kind. I know in France there is a law that prevents that. Here in the UK there isn't one, but there is still a question surrounding whether it's right to do it. My take on it, and I'd very much like to hear your take on it as well, so do pop a comment down in the box below. My take on it is that if we walk down any street, certainly in the UK, probably in the USA and European countries, and probably most countries everywhere actually, walk down any street, you're photographed and videoed countless times. So I'm not sure I'm really intruding upon anybody's privacy in that way. Of course, we wouldn't want to actually intrude on anyone's privacy if it becomes obvious, or if it's clear anyway that people don't want to be photographed, or it's a situation that shouldn't be photographed. Obviously you wouldn't do it. We don't want to upset anybody, invade privacy or anything of that sort, but you know, an ordinary candid portrait I can't see does any harm at all. So please do let me know what you think about this issue, because it is a little contentious and it is something I'd like to know your views on. All right, let's have a look at some lenses. And this is the first one I'd like to check out today. This is a lens I've had for some time. It's the Olympus Zuiko f4 200mm, and this really is a nice lens. It's quite large, but they always are at this focal length. It's a very long lens, so it does need to have some physical presence and some size. You can see it's got the usual nice Zuiko markings, the OM Zuiko markings in green, white and orange. It's got this lovely big focus grip with this nice Zuiko grip here, and that's very easy to turn. It's a little heavy to turn actually, this one. The aperture ring is at the front, as it always is on Zuiko lenses. That's fine for me because I learned photography on Russian lenses, which also, and Ukrainian lenses, which also have their aperture ring at the front of the lens. So that's fine for me. Other people I know prefer it at the back, but on this one it's at the front. This lens has a lovely little snaggy hood, and it does need that because it washes out in sunlight very readily. A very large front element there that you can see there, and that catches rays very, very easily. It's right at the front of the lens. It's not protected, so we can hood it like that very easily. You don't have to carry a hood with you. As usual, this lens is beautifully made. Everything turns precisely and nicely and smoothly, and it's a very lovely thing. Maximum aperture is f4 on this one, and apertures go up to f32, so that's a very small aperture opening indeed. The minimum focus distance is, well, it's pretty long. It's 2.5 meters, and that's a feature you'll find of most of these lenses. They do have a long minimum focus distance, but you don't really need a closer minimum focus distance than that with one of these, because it is so long and it's got such reach on it. I've found this one works pretty nicely from wide open at f4, although it is just a little soft at f4 and it sharpens up at f5.6 and certainly at f8. I usually shoot this at f5.6, where it gives me a nice balance of background blur and sharpness. So f5.6 is about right for one of these lenses. I think they do give lovely background blur. This one is very soft. There are one or two little harsh spots here and there, but very little of that. It's actually a very well behaved lens in terms of background blur, and one of the nicer vintage lenses for background blur I've found as well. All of the major manufacturers made one of these lenses, a 200mm f4, and they usually shoot quite nicely. This one shoots nicely. The Canon shoots very nicely, the 200mm f4. That's a nice lens, although again, like this one, it does need a little stopping down from f4. If you want to get the maximum sharpness out of it, stop it down to 5.6, same as this one. And both this one and the Canon lens do exhibit a little bit of chromatic aberration, so that's cleaned up easily in Lightroom if you don't like it. I know some photographers don't like it. Personally, it doesn't bother me too much. But yeah, they're available from Nikon, from Canon, from Olympus, from Konica, what's the one beginning with M? Minolta. All the old major manufacturers that made vintage lenses made one of these. So they're very widely available, although I haven't used them all. I've used only the Olympus and the Canon. A 200mm f4 could be ideal for you if you're looking for a long lens that will give you nice sharpness, good background blur to make portraits, street portraits, nature shots, whatever you want to do with it. There is one of these from the major manufacturers to suit. If you want to go longer than 200mm, in conventional optical lenses, that's going to get quite expensive quite quickly. So a good solution, and one that was often used back in the day, in the 70s and 80s, in the days of film, was a lens of this sort. And this is a mirror lens. This is the Ohnar mirror lens, and these were very popular back in the 70s and 80s because they're a nice cheap way of getting a nice long focal length somewhere beyond 200mm. Now, we did look at a new mirror lens recently from TT Artisan. This is an older one. This is the Ohnar, O-H-N-A-R. There we are. It's the Ohnar mirror lens. It's a 300mm and it's a constant aperture, as all mirror lenses are. Because they use a mirror, they don't use any optical elements, just mirrors in the way that a reflecting telescope works. So right at the back of the lens there's a big sort of parabolic lens, mirror rather, that reflects the light towards the front. And this black dot you can see here in the center of the lens, well, on the reverse side of that, there's another mirror that sends the image through this aperture in the back of the lens and onto the film or sensor. So you can't build an aperture mechanism into these lenses. It's just not possible, or certainly not economically possible. It would end up very, very expensive, very, very complex. So there are a fixed aperture. This one's f5.6, and these are a great way, and a nice cheap way actually, to really increase your reach. and to give yourself a very long lens at minimal cost. Now, the main feature, or one of the main features of these, is the fact that in their background blur, they don't give ordinary, circles or balls from specular highlights from point light sources. What they give, because of their construction, because there's a hole in the surface of that big parabolic mirror at the back through which the rays have to pass to get to the sensor, because of that hole, specular highlights or point light sources make donut shapes or ring shapes, and it can get quite wild and interesting. It's not everybody's cup of tea. Some people really don't like it, and it doesn't work in every situation, but it does work in many situations, and it gives you just fantastic, wild, groovy background blur that you won't get from any other lens. They're also very light. This is a 300mm lens. It's light and it's small. Compare it to the Olympus 200mm, and it's very much smaller. It's about half the size, and that's incredible. And I can tell you now, it's also about, round about half to 2/3 the weight. So it's much smaller and it's much lighter than a conventional lens would be, and that is a great advantage. An optical lens in this focal length would be an enormous thing. Optical lenses get bigger and bigger and bigger the longer you have to build them. Mirror lenses can contain that size and that weight into something more manageable, and they do a really good job of that. And I've used this lens mainly for candid portraits. Actually, I do love to make candid portraits on the street, and I've used this lens quite a bit for that, and it's worked really, really nicely. They don't have any chromatic aberration. Mirror lenses are immune from that. This one's nice and sharp. It's an f5.6 fixed aperture, so it's going to be fairly sharp, and it's just a very, very nice, very interesting way of making images that's a bit different to normal, and very, very practical and useful thing as well. So mirror lenses, I've found these wildly vary in prices. 4 or 5 years ago you could hardly give them away. These days they range between, what did I find, £20 to £800 for a very long 600mm lens. But I think around £50 or so should get you a 300mm, maybe even a 4 or a 500mm, around about that price. But don't pay more than, £75 to £100 for a long mirror lens, because I think anything else and the prices are probably just a little bit inflated. So mirror lenses are a very practical solution to a long lens in both cost terms and size and weight terms, and they'll make you some very kooky background blur as well. Finally, we've got the long zooms. Now, these lenses were very, very common back in the day, and a long zoom will usually run like this one from Miranda. They usually run from around about 70mm to 210mm, and there's a reason for that. Was because the short zooms usually ended at 70mm. That was the longest focal length of the short zooms, and so the 70 to 210 long zoom took over at that point. This is the Miranda version. It's an f4.5 to f5.6 lens, so a variable aperture. Some of them are fixed apertures, fixed f4s, and that's nice whenever you find it, but this is variable 4.5 to 5.6. It will still give you plenty of blur because it's a pretty long lens. Even at such fairly small maximum apertures, you'll still get some nice background blur out of a lens of this sort. This one is a push-pull lens, and many of them were of the push-pull design. Some of the friction material on these lenses has aged, and some of them are rather loose and sloppy. This one's still got some tension in it, so That's a good thing. Most of them say macro on them, just as this one does, but don't be fooled. This is not a macro lens. It will get pretty close because of its long reach, but it's not a macro lens. They usually say that on them, and that was a marketing ploy of the time. But there are many, many around. This is the Miranda version, but again, most of the manufacturers made one. Nikon, Canon, Olympus, Konica, Minolta, most companies made a long zoom of around 70 to 210. I've got the, what's this one? This is the Canon FD version, and this is, what's this one? Let me just see. Yeah, this is a 70 to 210, and this is a constant f4, so this is a nice lens because you keep that wider maximum aperture. It's just got a little extra up its sleeve that many of the cheaper lenses don't have. These can be found from, gosh, about £15 to about £50. Long zooms in any flavour or manufacturer you like. Now, because they're zooms, most of them will have some optical compromises. The Miranda lens is actually really nice. Doesn't seem to have a lot of optical compromises, but of course it's not perfect. You'll find some imperfections in it. It gives a little bit of CA sometimes. Also, the Canon one gives a little bit of CA sometimes, so if you don't like that, you can change it in Lightroom. It's a little soft wide open, so it's best shot at f5.6, stop down a bit to f5.6. A lens like this, and this one in particular, will give you some lovely background blur. This does give very soft, very nice background blur, and it also gives very nice colour too. But that's true also of the little Miranda lens. This gives beautiful colour, absolutely lovely colour, and it's very sharp as well. The number of manufacturers who made these lenses is, gosh, well, it's not infinite, but it's pretty large. All the third-party manufacturers made one, and all of the major manufacturers made one too, so there are many, 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 many to choose from. It's not always the case that the major manufacturers' lenses are better than the third-party lenses in this category either. There are some very nice third-party lenses in this category. Miranda, I keep talking about the Miranda one, that's a particularly nice one. The Vivitar 70 to 210 is a particularly nice one as well, if you can find a good one of those. The Canon one is very nice too, and there are many, many nice ones. So the major manufacturer ones are not always nicer than third-party ones. What I'm trying to say in a long-winded way is don't exclude third-party lenses here, because there are some nice ones. So, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, there we are. Various lovely long lenses that will give you plenty of reach for nature photography, candid portraits, landscapes, or even general photography, whatever you want to use them for. Most of them can be found certainly for under £100, many of them for under £50 as well, so they're very affordable and they're very good value for money. Plenty of bang for buck with these lenses. Mirror lenses also are an interesting take on the optical approach. They'll give you a different image, one that's not everybody's cup of tea, but you may really love it. They're out there, people. Don't buy the first one you see. Remember, patience and persistence are the watchwords in this game. So don't buy the first one you see, but wait, bide your time. When you see a good one for the right price, then snag it, but not before. So I think that's probably about it from me for this week. Many, many thanks for watching. I do appreciate it. And please, if you've enjoyed this show and if you enjoy the content on this channel, chuck us a sub. That would be appreciated also. Many, many thanks to subscribers for your support. That is a genuine, heartfelt thanks to you guys. Many, many thanks for that, and many, many thanks to patrons for your support. Without that support, this channel couldn't be run or made in the way that it is, so many, many thanks for that. If you would like to become a patron and support this channel, you can do that over at www.patreon.com/Zonography. You can do that for as little as $1 per month. As for me, that's it for now. So if you're not doing anything too troubling, difficult, irritating or irksome next week at around this time, please do join me and check in for a spot more Zonography. Thanks for watching. Cheerio all.